Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, hosted by Organization Development and Change, Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State. This is a monthly webinar series presented during your lunch hour. My name is Yuling Chang. I am a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State University. We also have Sakun Giri, who is the moderator for Q&A session. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please use the chat feature in the Zoom platform. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change are designed for professionals who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in their organization. Furthermore, there is a PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, we are presenting Identifying Key Success Factor in Workplace Diversity, presented by Dr. Jamie Campbell. Dr. Campbell served as Assistant Dean for Diversity Enhancement Programs at the Smith College of Business. He earned a PhD in Workforce Education with concentrations in Organization Development and Human Resource Development at Penn State University. Dr. Campbell was the recipient of the 2013 Dr. James Robinson Equal Opportunity Award. This award is given to recognize a Penn State faculty or staff member who has contributed to the university by improving cross-cultural understanding. Dr. Campbell has published in various textbooks. The most recent one is Building Effective Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Programs, Transforming Organizational Culture Using Step-by-Step Organizational Change Approach in a Globally Connected World. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker today. Dr. Campbell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yuling. I appreciate it. All right, so just a couple of quick notes. As you all saw in the chat, and also you heard Yuling mention, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function, but more importantly, or just as important, as we're going through this today, because I know this is a webinar and there may be some things that jump out at you. If you want to place things in the chat, that's fine too, but we hope to have time to talk at the very end for some in-depth Q&A. So I'm looking forward to getting into this. So we're talking about diversity in the workplace today, and that's really complicated, especially depending on where you live. It can be even more complicated. But right now, what we're focusing on is the idea of how to implement these things in the workplace, in diversity measures in the workplace, to make it not only impactful, but beneficial, and more importantly, sustainable. But before we even can begin that conversation, we need to look at the people in these positions, the diversity officers themselves. And when we talk about key success factors, we're not using key performance indicators, but these are things that will really help you to strive, because I'm not really telling you how to do it, just giving you an idea on what it is. But for the people that have to drive these programs, the people that have to drive this thing we do called diversity, or these endeavors in the workplace, we found, or I found, that there are at least 5 different key measures that you have to have. And in specific order, the first, tenacity. In doing research in this area, I found that all of the diversity officers I've met had faced adversity, had faced disappointment, had faced disillusion. In some of these instances, because the work is hard. And a lot of times people look at diversity work as just being warm and fuzzy, as just being stuff that we can do to be happy. And they even incorrectly see it as being easy. So the idea of being tenacious in your work, to be able to fall down, get up, have things go wrong, to look at things differently. There's a tenaciousness that these officers need when they're implementing these diversity programs, just as much as they need passion. They need to have a fire about what they're doing. They need to have an emotional content that they understand, that idea of being able to look at things not only from their lens, but from the lens of the people who are on the other side of the table. They have to be able to bring folks together, but they also have to do it in a manner that's not sympathetic, but empathetic, where they understand all of the arguments that are taking place, but they still have a passion and fire for what they do. They still have to understand who they are. They have to have that core centeredness. And in talking to some of the other diversity officers when I was conducting this research, talking to some of the people who are not necessarily in diversity positions, but adjacent, they have a true why as to why they're in it. It could be their own, for their own benefit. It could be for their children, their spouse, their partner, or someone in their family, but they have a passion for it. The other piece is the adaptability. In this ever-changing world, in this ever-changing climate, they have to be adaptable. And adaptable doesn't mean that they're acquiescing. Adaptable doesn't mean that they're giving up. Adaptable doesn't mean that they're completely shifting who they are. Adaptable means they are finding new and inventive ways to continually push what they're doing forward. They are finding new ways to engage and finding new ways that they may not have thought about before. And this is beyond thinking outside of the box. They are thinking outside of the boxes. For those of you that play chess, you have to think 3 moves ahead. Sometimes these officers in these positions who are leading this charge have to think 6 steps ahead. There is a longitudinal thought to their planning and engagement, but it is there. They also know who they are. And you heard me mention that when it comes to the tenacity and the passion part. They know who they are. They are centered, and they recognize that they're human. As administrators, as individuals in the C-suite or in these higher positions, oftentimes it seems like they're just making decisions based on numbers. Well, they recognize their humanity, and more importantly, they show it to their colleagues. At times of situations of crisis, whether it be the Botha murder or the Floyd murder or the Taylor murder, they show this idea of being outraged and being frustrated. When they see these ideas of what's happening with transgender rights going into disarray in many places, they are able to say, this is where I am, and convey that in a manner that makes other people not feel afraid, not cower, but be able to lean into where they are. They create safe spaces by just understanding who they are. One of the most powerful words in their vocabulary is, I don't know. Because they understand that not all the time that they're going to be the expert. They understand that they might need to ask someone else, and this is where you find that they're resourceful. They're bringing people to the table that don't always mix, that don't always see eye to eye, that don't always engage. They are working to create this better community, but at the same time, they're using all resources that they have. And we're going to talk a little bit more about resources later, but with these officers, they're using the people around them to the best of their ability, and they're getting the best out of them. They're taking on a lot of OD principles because they are allowing people to talk. They're bringing people together from different stations, and they're making these engagements work. So now that you know a little bit about the people who are leading these charges, let's talk about the workplace itself. So what I found is that there were 7 factors, and there might be a few more, but there are some factors that I may not have uncovered yet. But these factors in themselves talk about what it means to implement diversity in the workplace. I want you all to think about your own individual organizations or institutions. How many of you can say that you might see these points? Or can you tell me in your organization, and you can put it right in the chat, you can tell me in your organization, what do you see as a powerful moment or something that your organization does well within this? And don't make me treat this like class. I don't want to call on anybody out of turn, but we want you to engage. So I'm going to keep going. And as you think of it, or as you think of them as we're going through, you can be sure to put them in the chat. So the first thing we want to talk about are resource groups. Some of you might know them as business resource groups, employee resource groups, affinity groups. It is to the comment above. And many of you all have had to go through the torture in high school of reading Shakespeare. I shouldn't say torture, that's not nice. For me, it was. Of reading Shakespeare and understanding it. But the idea of rose by any other name smells just as sweet. For these resource groups, they are just as great, just as magnificent, no matter what you call them. For the very reasons that you see on your screen now, but also they build a sense of community and they build a sense of empowerment for the employees. As a new employee going into the women's empowerment group or the women's resource group, she may find, or they may find, that there are people who are like-minded who can support them. They also may find advocates and champions within that group. It is that engagement of community where they're not sure how to mix. Remember, many of you will be working with individuals who are coming into the workplace for the very first time. While they might have experience working before, they may not understand working in the specific area that they're just getting into. And age in this regard doesn't matter. It is about, one, learning the culture, two, learning what you're supposed to do, and three, having someone who is willing to shepherd you along. And also this safe space. Can you imagine your first day at work? Or do you remember your first day at work? How long did it take you to figure out not only where the parking lot was, but just where to go eat? Imagine your first day in that new city. You need to find things like maybe a barber, a church, a community pickup lead, these things. A lot of these resource groups do that, and they provide the informal coaching, and we'll talk about mentoring in a second. They provide the informal coaching that many people don't often get, and it's not a checkbox situation. Also, usually these resource groups have a champion. They have someone who is either connected to a C-suite or just under a C-suite level that can go and speak to the plight or issues that members in the group are facing. If any of you have resource groups in your organizations, if you put some of those names in the chat, that'll be great too. And remember also, if you have questions, you can put it in the Q&A section and we'll get to that at the very end. So I talked about mentoring a little bit, and I want to go through this picture. We know a picture can say 1,000 words. Well, look at the levels of engagement. And more importantly, when it comes to mentoring, you're not seeing anyone of same race or same gender working with someone. You see the gentleman on the side looks like he's asking a question. It could be of his mentor, or it could be the other way around. You see the woman in the forefront pointing out and dealing with things of that nature. Again, it's just explaining and engaging with people who are coming in without knowledge. What's important about this idea of diversity in the workplace is that when people begin to establish these mentoring programs, they often look at it as this has to be a static thing, a fixed thing. We found that both structured mentoring and informal mentoring work just as well to keep employees within the organization. It also helps to give the employees some sense of what the culture is. It also helps the employee to learn how to maneuver. And also, as many of you all know, being a mentor doesn't just stop at 5 p.m. It talks about work-life balance. Being a mentor speaks to all the different things of how you engage in the workplace and how you transition out. When we talk about mentoring, you then get into what's next for the organization. So you're looking at pipelines and how to proceed. Many organizations now are looking for diverse talent, trying to figure out new ways to do it. So does anyone know the definition of insanity? And if you don't, let me help. It is doing the same thing the same way, expecting a different result. Many of our organizations fall on that, and they say, oh, we've looked here, we can't find anyone qualified. We sent out ads here. We don't see anyone responding from a diverse background. Well, that's because they've been doing it for the last 10 to 20 to 30 years in the same fashion with the same energy. If you keep doing that, you'll get the same results. Organizations need to look at how they recruit and not just from where they recruit. but maybe from when? And what do I mean by that? What age do you begin the recruitment process? Think about the position you're in. When did you know you wanted to do that? Was it in high school? Was it in middle school? Was it in elementary school? Or was it until the senior year of college where you had to pick a job offer? Well, if we can start talking to students sooner, in high school, in middle school, and not wait until their senior year, we may be able to create pipelines to organizations to not only get students in the college, but then to go on after college and go into the workplace. They're necessary for organizations to exist. My friends in sustainability always talk about the green and always talk about working within the environment to create better organizations, better networks, and what to do next. But for diversity, we look at sustainability as succession planning. Who's going to be next? So not only with mentoring, but also reaching back and looking in both directions. Who's next? Who's coming out of college? What colleges can we go to? What spaces in the employment sphere can we reach out to find people who are qualified? It's not that people aren't qualified. We just haven't found the right space for them. Now, this is difficult because we always say, well, with diversity, how do you organize? How long does it take? To be honest, based on the research, it takes about a year to establish a diversity office. Now, that doesn't mean that the office is running effectively yet. It takes a year to get the idea in place. It takes a year to make people understand that you actually have a diversity office. And even that year, after that year, some folks may still not recognize that there's a diversity office. But in order to make colleagues understand what you're trying to do, establish a timeline. And I don't mean a 1 or a 5 or a 3-year plan. I mean a timeline for an event to take place, a timeline for things you want to institute. In 4 years' time, we want to increase our diversity hiring by 20%. In 3 years' time, we want to make sure that we have gender parity as it becomes wage payroll. Because looking at these events oftentimes just means we haven't taken the time to look at it before. And again, because it's diversity, we don't want people to get the misimpression that it's an overnight thing, that we can just snap our fingers and it's done. We want folks to understand that this is work, that this is going to be an endeavor to make us better as an organization. It's going to increase our bottom line, but it may take time. And it's not a 1-year commitment. In some instances, it may be longer than that. So I talked about tools. I don't know if any of you like to build, but it's hard to take a screwdriver to a Phillips head screw, a flathead screwdriver to a Phillips head screw. You have to have the right tools to build things. You have to have the right tools, whether you're building something, whether you're making something in the kitchen. If you don't have the right ingredients, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't feel right. Well, the same things work in the workplace. Oftentimes when folks look at diversity, they look at it from a standpoint, well, it's easy. You don't need a lot. Anybody can do it. We've got all these people here. Well, think about this for a second. What resources do you need at your job? What resources do you need just to make your day a little bit more constructive, a little easier as it works? Well, when we speak to things in diversity, we're talking about resources like people. We don't necessarily need people who think exactly alike, but we need people who are engaged. We need people who want to be there. And within the organization, this is how you make your team better, by having mixed teams. I don't need to belabor the point about the business case for diversity. I'm sure you all have heard it, but think about how different teams work. Would you send a single text teams to a company like, I don't know, Avon, where they are, sorry about that, where they're looking at how the women in their organization work? Or would you send a mixed group? Would you send a mixed group to any organization? And I think that would be the better thing, no matter what the organization is, to send not only a group that is well-rounded, but is well mixed when it comes to different thoughts, different ideas, different process. Budgets. I can't say enough how important it is to make sure that your budget is effectively planned. Organizations, when they're looking at things to do or when they're looking at how to gear up, they're always saying, well, we could put maybe a small amount of money in and it'll be okay. Well, for the most part, that doesn't work. You need to have at least a pragmatic approach to doing budgets. But if you haven't, people will always stand up and pay attention and say, okay, I get it. This is sincere. Think about within your organization how that happens when someone puts a budget and then says, oh, we have to pull it back. You take it a lot of times, many people, not just you, but many people take it a lot of times and say, it may be a situation where that's not important to the organization. So it's important to understand how that is applied. In time, remember, diversity efforts may not work their first charm. Diversity efforts may be a situation where it doesn't go as you plan. So you might need to give yourself grace. The organization might need to understand, hey, we might need to step back and rethink. Just like with any other project, it doesn't always go right the first time. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember New Coke, but it didn't work. They took it back, brought back, I don't want to say old Coke, but regular Coke. And as a soda, Coca-Cola Company kept on moving. But they also looked at what they did wrong and they began to diversify. They started to branch out to water and to juice to ensure that they would stay a strong organization. So giving yourself the time to engage and figure out what's next. Now, I know oftentimes when we're talking about organizations and we're looking at things, we're trying to figure out who's doing what right. That's a good thing. But remember the quote at the bottom, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And what's important about that is it simply means look at where your company, your competitors are. See what they're doing right, see what they're doing wrong. Learn just as much from their mistake as they do from what they did positively. In diversity, a lot of times we often fall on our laurels and say, nope, that'll never be us. We'll never do that. We know what we're doing, we're engaged, and we'll never make that mistake. And then sure enough, someone makes that very same mistake. Think about it. You go from Starbucks to Gucci to American Eagle. All of these companies have similar mistakes. Even Dove soap have similar mistakes, but they didn't watch what their other competitors were doing. They watched the positive, but also they failed to learn from the negative. So if we can learn in our organizations, what did the other company do, and look inwardly to say, hey, this might be a problem. The difficult thing with that is it means you have to do check-ins with your employees. It might be tough. We're calling them courageous conversations right now. But I think we might just want to have conversations. How are we doing? How is this for you? Can you imagine how much better things would be if we checked in with our affinity groups, with our caring groups? And this could be where you have the groups that are caring for parents or caring for children, just the different affinity groups within the organization. If you check in with them, maybe the negative things that have occurred within other organizations won't occur with yours. Or maybe you'll be that lighthouse when something is about to go wrong and you can shine a light on it. It won't be easy, but we can do it. The last piece on this is that we have to know where we are. Understanding who we are, what we're doing, and what we want to do. Now, I don't know if many of you all know the full DEIBA, but remember, we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and accessibility. So we're looking at how we think about what all is doing and what kind of organization are we? Are we accessible not only to people who are fully able, but people who have different abilities? Are we accessible to people who are neurodiverse? how are we engaging with not only our external clients, but our internal clients? How are our employees feeling about the workspace? Are we a space that is conducive to people who are differently abled, meaning you might have someone who has a vision disability, who's differently abled as it pertains to vision? Do our computers work well? It's something small, but it keeps your employees engaged. It keeps your people wanting to know more about the organization and wanting to stay within that. Again, as I said initially, it won't just be an overnight situation. It won't just be a situation where you immediately say, hey, we got a diversity idea and we're implementing it to 100%. Take some time to think about where you are and then say, okay, we're here and we want to go. This is truly, I guess, the old person in me coming out, but it's the idea of the journey begins with a single step, recognizing where you are, where you would like to be, and where you think you need to be are important gauges to understand what you need to do for diversity. Remember, each organization is going to have a different spin on what they need for diversity. Some may need more in terms of gender. Some may need more in terms of orientation education. Some may need more just in terms of race and ethnicity and how they're engaging. And some may need more of a cultural diversity explosion. So as we're getting to learn who we are as an organization, it makes us stronger. By shoring up those small parts, we engage to what we could do for the large parts. So I've talked a lot, and that's my presentation. I can be reached at the address below, but I really do appreciate it. I hope that this was helpful, but I'd be happy to take on any questions and answers right now. One of the things that's important also to remember as we're engaging diversity or working through diversity, it's important to understand everybody is in a different space. And I spoke to organizations initially, but I also want you to remember your people may be in a different space. In education, there's a term, differentiated education. Everybody is learning something different, but they're all in the same room. Well, it's the same way for diversity. A lot of times we take for granted that everyone is thinking the same way. And I even had that mistake, especially when I was talking to colleagues here, as we were going through COVID and learning about the different rules of wearing COVID and why students may not want to wear masks in buildings, in offices, and having to explain that to colleagues because it was simple to me and I understood my students from diverse communities who didn't want to do it, but some of my colleagues may not have. And so walking through that and explaining why that is. But it's a good thing because we had that conversation. So it's just really about understanding and leveling with the engagement of knowing where people are and taking them at face value, even if they disagree. Remember, diversity is not about light. Diversity is about respect and civility. It is about understanding who you are, but also allowing the other individual to be themselves. That doesn't mean you agree. That doesn't mean you both come to a kumbaya moment, but it does mean you're able to engage and either respectfully agree to disagree or learn something new. I hope it's the latter. All right, I'm going to stop before I get the little bell. But say again, I just want to turn it back, and you, Ling, I'll turn it back to you if there are any questions.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation, Jamie. We have a couple of questions here, and I will get started with the first one. So how can organizations incorporate diverse perspectives and experiences into decision-making process, and why is this important for overall success?
So I think, okay, so let me try to take that apart. You said, can you read it one more time for me?
Yes, certainly. How can organizations incorporate diverse perspectives and experiences into decision-making processes, and why is this important for overall success?
Okay. So so how we incorporate it into the decision-making process. So the first thing to understand is having a mixed table. And what I mean by that is not having everyone trying to avoid groupthink. And in avoiding groupthink, it's where everyone around the table looks like one another and they're just talking. And when I say look, I mean not only from race or gender, but also socioeconomic status. You have to have the table to be different. And so when you're making decisions, it's easier to integrate these ideas of diversity, of acceptance, of inclusion, because now you're having different people to talk. A lot of times when you're having decisions made at the C-suite, everyone is forgetting who is going to impact, who are these decisions going to impact. So it's important to be able to have a group. And again, I spoke to the OD principle, the idea of the bottom and the top coming together, not forcing the middle to either freeze and panic or be concerned about what to do next, but to be engaged all the way through. So I hope that helped with that answer.
Yes.
I saw, and actually I had one popped up. I saw Maddie's question, and Maddie, I hope, forgive me for just calling you Maddie straight away, but I wish I had really like rosy and positive answer to that. Maddie's question was just, I've been reading about the efforts at state legislatures across the country to dismantle DEIB offices and activities at universities. Do you have any insights on the situation here in Pennsylvania? I don't have like strong insight. What I do have is looking at things like issues, the Chronicle of Education in terms of Blacks, looking at that. There is an actual tracker where they make decisions, and I apologize for not having it. If you email me, I can get you that link. I do think we should be aware of what's going on. Right now, we have a Democratic governor, so it's usually a Democratic governor with a Republican Senate or House that are having the difficulty. But I think what happens in one state can very easily happen in ours, and we need to be vigilant and prepared for it to happen. I think when you look at a lot of these states, you have to look at why these things are coming about. And if you notice a pattern, it'll be just like when civil rights occurred, people were afraid because they were saying, oh, this is changing the fabric of our life. This is changing our social construct. It is, and hopefully for the better, and hopefully that everyone is level. But in Pennsylvania, we still have a minute or two before I think the noise become, not the noise, the comments or the hopes become louder for change in terms of diversity or eliminating diversity within universities. I think the engagement for us is to remember that voting matters, is to remember that the people that we put in office generally have a responsibility to us as voters. It's different, even here, and I'm in State College currently. Even here in State College, when you go to those school board meetings, and yes, I know they're not the most exciting or the most sexy thing to do, but when you go to those school board meetings and you listen to how they're trying to implement diversity, how they're trying to engage inclusion and belonging, I think it's important. It's important just because we never know what books are going to come off shelves. And even if you don't agree with it, sometimes you have to be able to say, okay, here's why I don't. And we have to remember that we can be just as passionate, we can be just as engaged, and we can be just as human. So I think it's important to understand that.
Thank you. Another question comes from Brenda. She asks, this is the first time I heard DEIBA versus DEIA. Can you share some more information about the change and when are organizations expected to transition?
So I think it's not so much an expected transition. I think it's something that is coming. If you think about it, we transition words or we add on words every so often. So initially we were working with DE or D&E, then DEI. And then we added on belonging, because when we spoke about inclusion, we had to understand that the idea of belonging meant something else. The idea of belonging gave an added piece. Many of you have heard the example, it was coming to the dance, and then the belonging was actually allowing you to play your own music. So there was that piece of it. The A, because we begin to talk more about accessibility. So this is kind of right at the beginning stages of it. Not a lot of folks are using it, and we're using it intermittently, but you're seeing more DEIB and then more DEIBA. So it's not something that you're going to have to change. Like if you have it embedded in your organization where you have to change it right now at this very moment, but it is something to be aware of that's soon to be, I think, is soon to be coming. And remember, when we're talking about accessibility, we're not just talking about can you walk through the door? We mean from not only a physical sense or an ability sense, but also from socioeconomic, and just tying it back into belonging and inclusion. Do you have access to it? Again, tying it back into those ERGs, those resource groups, making sure that you have some type of access in the engagement.
Thank you. Another question is, what are your suggestions on getting sponsors buy-in for the DEI programs?
Okay, so my first suggestion is to remind them of what the business case is. So the business case simply states, the more diverse your team, the better you will do. The more market share, the more bottom line, the more engagement. The other piece of it is go with fact and heart. And the reason why I say go with fact is because we know that this country is a changing demographic. 2025, there will be more students of color in classes than their white counterparts. We know that by 2046, the idea of the word minority and who it applies to may not be the same thing as it does in 2023. We understand these things. So organizations, in order to be sustainable, profitable, and increase their market share, should reflect what their clients look like. It should reflect their base that people are coming in to buy and engage from. What I've found is that when you speak to organizations and when you speak to companies about why they should recruit this way or why they should get involved here, when you can approach not only the heart, but the head in terms of saying, here's what it means for your bottom line. Remember, employee turnover is one of the biggest costs that organizations face, other than lawsuits. So if you have people who are working there, who want to work there, who are engaged, who look like the communities in which you serve, or the communities in which you want to profit from, the idea might be, oh, this is why we do it. So when you're talking about getting clients to buy in, or when you're talking about getting organizations to buy in, if they don't, remember, they have to adapt. I always give people the BlackBerry example. BlackBerry thought it was the top phone, thought it didn't need to adapt. And now how many of you, other than me, how many of you have a BlackBerry? All right, mine doesn't work, but I still have it. But think about that for a second. It's just like that with organizations. If you don't adapt, if you don't look at it, look at your organization, see what you're doing, see how you're engaging, you may not be an organization for long, or you may not have the same relevance that you thought you had. I appreciate that. I still carry it. I still love mine too. But it is what it is. They didn't adapt. They didn't change. They just thought, oh, we're great. Organizations that don't look at the culture, don't look at current societal issues, don't look at where we are, it doesn't work. And they're not sustainable.
Right.
But I truly did love it.
So another question is around mentoring that you discussed. So what are some of the benefits of a diverse mentoring program for both mentors and mentees? And how can organizations make sure that they are creating inclusive and equitable mentoring relationships?
Okay, that's a great question on the mentoring side. Because a lot of times in organizations, when they do the box check mentoring, They'll say, okay, he's a Black guy, let's put him with a Black guy. That doesn't always work. There has to be a want to be a mentor. Now, if you find an African-American male, in my case, I'll say an African-American male who wants to mentor an African-American male, that's great. But they could be different as apple and orange. They just happen to both be Black. It's the same thing with mentoring. You have to find people that want to do it first. Then, once you have the people that want to do it, you can bring the people that say, I need it, and bring them together. The idea for the mentee is that they learn about the organization. They learn how to live within the organization. They understand what the culture is. They understand how things are going to move, and they get to ask questions of their mentor that they wouldn't ask of their supervisor. And remember, the mentor doesn't have to be within the same hiring chain. The mentor can be in another aspect of the organization. But that's what the mentee gets, what the mentor gets. Imparting wisdom, sitting down and talking and figuring it out, oftentimes give the mentor a new chance or a new way to see things. And oftentimes the mentor gets to ask the mentee questions. I don't understand what this is like. Why is this happening? And it could be questions about life. My kids are doing this. Did you do that? Did you get this? Mentoring is a two-way street. The mentee gets just as much from the mentor as the mentor gets from the mentee. It's about being able to be vulnerable. It's about being able to be open and share and learn from each other. So mentors, some mentors who are box checking will see this as a time-consuming endeavor. The mentors who are really into it for the engagement, will see this as an opportunity to not only grow an individual, to support and help a new person, but they'll also be able to take time and remember where they were. They'll also get the idea of, okay, it's a renewal thing, but they get to learn from what's coming in. And a lot of times the mentor has the opportunity to work with the person that might be mentoring him one day. But it is about that engagement. And the mentor, I think, if they're doing it with ease, not ease, but with some correctness, they'll get just as much out of it. And before I forget, I want to remind you all that race, ethnicity, and orientation should not be a factor in mentoring. If an individual requests that, that's fine. But in general, you shouldn't line up someone with someone else just because. Remember when I showed you that picture of the mentoring scenario, it was about the engagement. It was about wanting to be there. And so having that is very important. But as long as the individuals want to be a mentor, I think that's the most important thing. But I do believe it's a two-way street.
So this is a nice segue into the next question. So the question is, how can organizations go beyond the superficial diversity initiatives and truly foster a culture that is inclusive and fosters belonging?
Okay. Oh, that's a tough one. All right, let me see. I got 6 minutes, maybe. So I got to get this quick. So when we talk about that superficial diversity work, it's the light of the warm and the fuzzy that people see. It's the glossy picture. When we go deeper, it's about having those courageous conversations. It's about doing things like internal audits. Internal audits are not just for money. We're not just for finances. Internal audits sometimes can say, where are we as an organization in relation to gender, in relation to orientation, in relation to our caregivers? Many of us are in the sandwich generation. So not only are we caring for children, but we're caring for our aging parents. What is it like to be in the workplace for that? You can do surveys, you can do focus groups. You can even go so far as to just ask the question. What I found is that doing an audit, having an outside organization come in and do a diversity audit, which means you have to literally open your books, open your information, open your files to see what you're doing when it comes to diversity. When you do these things, it allows you to go deeper. And when you're going deeper, you're dealing with the opposition. You're not just doing it at a surface level where everybody is saying, yay, diversity. because like with Mandy's question initially asking, excuse me, about the changes that we're going through in the state, you're dealing with the opposition up front, where people are saying, nope, we're a great organization. We don't need to do anything else. Where there are other people who might be saying, yeah, we need a lot to do a lot. Dealing with the opposition and dealing with it constructively, where it could be some heated conversations. It could be that big Thanksgiving dinner where there's a ton of arguments, but at the end, you're still family, you're still working it through to get to a solution. Arguments are okay, as long as they're positive arguments. And what do I mean by positive arguments? We reach a conclusion. It is hard to get past a lot of times the surface levels with big organizations. But if you continue to look at where you are, remember I said the inward, knowing who you are in the organization, how you operate, what's next. And you don't just stop when it gets difficult. Diversity endeavors a lot of times become pushed to the side when it gets too hard. You know, every February shouldn't just be Black History Month. It should be embedded in your organization's culture that African-American history is important, period. Granted, we know that it's targeted for this month, and we want that because that is what a lot of folks died, argued, and worked from. Remember, initially it was a week, and then it moved to a month. So I'm not saying eliminate that, but I'm also saying don't just limit it to February. And that's organizations should do that as well. Don't just limit women's history to October or Latinx history to September and October, or talk about Pride just in June. You highlight it more in that month, but it should be a recurring theme. That's how we get deeper into it. That's how we can make it more sustainable and more impactful to the members of the organization.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question.
Okay.
So this is around budget and DEI initiatives. So the question is, how can organizations balance the need for financial efficiency and meeting business goals while also attending to the importance of investing in DEI initiatives?
So I think the first thing is you have to understand how important is it to your organization. Now, I say that and it sounds kind of like, oh, that's a typical safe answer. No, you want to make sure that it's important. And what can you do? When you look at organizations, a lot of times the budget that diversity officers are already given are either small or non-existent. And sometimes they're often cut first. So how do you construct it where the organization says diversity is important and we're going to do this? You do it by having a proactive budget in mind and a smart budget. And sometimes it is truly a to the vest budget of what you need exactly. It is never going to be enough funding in diversity. I say that as a diversity officer. But I also say, if you can plan it accordingly, it is about those kitchen table meals. I grew up with my mom learning how to budget. And it was really sometimes, okay, Oreos might be really important to me, but maybe I can get another cookie that's just as good. And that doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to spend money to do these programs. But you do the research to find out what it is, and then you look where you can save costs. In this time, in this current climate, we're always looking to figure out how we can maneuver money, how we can pinch a penny. How can we do this better? Well, when it comes to looking at how we recruit, how we retain, how we engage, we may not be able to have the celebratory program with the top roast beef. I like roast beef. The top roast beef. But maybe we can have some decent hamburgers. Sometimes in this effort, it is about knowing our budget, just like our household budget. We can't always have everything we want. But if we can try to get the things we need, the organization most times will try to work with us. And sometimes we have to recognize what can and can't be done. But we have to make sure that when we're budgeting, we explain that diversity is important and we come with realistic numbers, and we come with a situation of saying, if it's important to the organization, we'll figure out a way to do it. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it did. Thank you so much for your fantastic presentation and for your insights, Dr. Campbell. Back to you, Abby.
Thank you, Sakun. And thank you so much, Dr. Campbell, for sharing a key success factor in workforce diversity. On behalf of our OD&C and workforce education program, we hope you think this webinar is helpful. If we did not get to your question, please send us the email or reach out to the presenter directly via email. Our future webinar, we would like to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take the survey using the link in the chat box. Our next webinar is about tool agentic career leadership and organization development, assistance evidence-based approach on May 26th from 12 to 1 p.m. Registrations for all events are free and we can find on our website. You can also find us on our social media platforms such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.